Welcome to Shelbrook Speaks Out, where we explore ideas, thoughts, and perspectives purely from our own point of view. Please note that the discussions in this podcast are based on personal opinions and should not be taken as professional advice or factual information. We encourage you to think critically, do your own research, and form your own conclusions. Thanks for tuning in, and let's dive into today's topic. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and to my insomniacs out there, good night to you. Hi there, everyone. I am Ben Shelbrook, and welcome back to Shelbrook Speaks Out. Today, we're going to talk about something I think most of us can relate to. What happens when you take something you love doing, your hobby, and you start doing it for money? Can you still enjoy it the same way, or does the fun kind of start to slip away once it becomes a job? We'll explore that in detail, but we'll also ask an important question. Is there a way that you can keep the joy alive even when you're making money from something that you love? With all that over, let's dive in. First, let's talk about why hobbies are so special. Think about your favorite hobby. Maybe you love painting, knitting, playing the guitar. Hobbies are those activities that make you feel good, right? They help you relax. They give you a break from the stress of everyday life. What's key about hobbies is that you're in control. You get to decide when and how you do it, and that sense of freedom is what makes a hobby so enjoyable. Now, what happens when that hobby turns into a job? Let's say you start selling paintings or baking cakes for customers. At first, it might be exciting when you're making money doing something you already love. But over time, you might notice that it doesn't feel quite the same. The fun starts to kind of slip away, and your hobby feels more like a chore. Why does that happen? Well, psychologists have a term for this, and it's called intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. When you do something because it makes you feel good, that's intrinsic motivation. You're motivated by the activity itself, and that's what makes it fun. When you start doing the same thing for external reasons like money, recognition, to try and meet other people's expectations, that's extrinsic motivation. And the more you rely on extrinsic motivation, the less fun that activity becomes. Let's say you love baking, for example. You bake because it makes you happy, and the smell of fresh bread, cookies, whatever you're making, it fills your kitchen with warmth. That is an intrinsic motivation. You're doing it for the joy that it brings you. But once you start selling your baked goods, your motivation shifts. Now that you're thinking about customer orders, deadlines, and making sure everything is just perfect, that extrinsic motivation, and over time, it can sap the joy away from your love of baking. Here's another important idea. Hobbies are a form of play, and play is important for adults, not just for kids. Play is how we relax, we unwind, we let our creative minds flow. When we're playing, whether it's drawing, dancing, building something, our brains release chemicals like dopamine that make us feel good. But once we start turning back once we start turning that play into work, we lose that sense of freedom, and it's no longer a break from the world. It's part of the grind. And I'm going to pause right there for just a moment. I am not a doctor. I am not a PhD. I've never taken a medical class. The closest I've ever been to a doctor is when I go to a doctor's appointment. So, kind of like I said in the opening, this is all my opinion. This is stuff that I've just kind of run across. I'm regurgitating it because it helps to prove the point that I'm trying to make. So, let's just kind of run with that, and I'm going to keep going. Think about the last time you did something just for fun. You probably felt energized and refreshed and even maybe a little bit more creative afterward. That's because play is good for our mental health. It helps us recharge and kind of reset. But when we lose that playfulness in our hobbies because of external pressures, it can leave us feeling drained instead of fulfilled. Now let's talk about personal identity. A lot of people tie their sense of identity to their hobbies. Let's say if you're a photographer, maybe you see yourself as someone who captures the beauty of the world. Or if you're a writer, maybe your identity is wrapped up in your ability to create stories. When we turn these hobbies into jobs, we're not just risking the burnout, we're also risking our sense of self. Let me explain. If you start doing photography or writing professionally, you might find that the success or failure of your work begins to affect how you feel about yourself. Maybe you start to feel pressure about you have to be perfect all the time, or you feel that you constantly have to live up to others' expectations. If things don't go as planned, if your business doesn't take off or you get negative feedback, it can make you feel like you're failing, not just your work, but you. And that's a heavy load to carry. One of the most fascinating concepts in psychology is something called flow. Flow is like the state where you're so immersed in what you're doing that time seems to completely disappear. You're not thinking about anything else. You're just living in that moment. When we're in a state of flow, our brains are fully engaged, and it's one of the most rewarding experiences you can have. People often describe it as feeling, air quotes, in the zone, where the rest of the world just kind of disappears and fades away. The interesting thing is that flow is more likely to happen when you're doing things for fun without any external pressure. So when a hobby becomes a job, it's harder to experience that state of flow. Instead of being fully absorbed in the activity, your mind might start to wander to deadlines and client demands or financial worries. But here's the good news. It's not impossible to find your flow in professional work. It just takes more effort to create the right environment for it. You need to kind of carve out moments where you can still feel immersed and let your creativity run free, but you don't have the constraint of worry of meeting any kind of expectations. Let's also touch on stress and burnout, which are very real concerns when your hobby becomes your job. When you're passionate about something, it's easy to overwork yourself. You might spend long hours trying to perfect your craft or take on too many projects because you're afraid to say no. And this can lead to burnout, where you feel mentally and physically drained, and then suddenly, even the thing you once loved now feels like a burden. So how do you prevent burnout? One of the best ways is to set boundaries for yourself. Give yourself permission to say no to projects that don't excite you. Make time to do your hobby just for fun, without the pressure of turning it into something profitable. And remember to practice self-care, whether that means taking breaks, spending time with loved ones, or finding other ways to just kind of relax and recharge. The key here that we're looking for is balance. Finally, you can find a balance between doing a hobby for fun and doing it professionally. The answer is yes. You can find a balance between doing a hobby for fun and doing it professionally, but it does require a conscious effort. You have to protect the joy that comes from the hobby side of things. That might mean setting aside specific time where you do the activity just for yourself without any pressure to perform or produce anything. Or it might be just finding ways to inject playfulness back into your work, even when you're doing it for money. The reality is, when we turn our hobbies into jobs, the relationship changes. But that doesn't mean the joy has to disappear completely. With the right mindset and strategies, it's possible to keep some of that original passion alive, even when you're doing the same thing for money. So, as we explore today, there's a delicate balance between turning a hobby into a profession and still keeping the joy alive. It all comes down to how we manage that shift from intrinsic to extrinsic motivation. And how do we protect the playfulness and freedom that made us love our hobby in the first place? Now, this doesn't mean turning your passion into a profession is a bad thing. For some people, making money from what they love can be incredibly rewarding. If they can find ways to keep that balance in check, it takes some effort, but it is possible. A few key takeaways to think about. Number one, protect your play. Carve out time to do your hobby just for fun, whether it's writing, painting, woodworking, whatever the case may be. Don't let it all become tied to money or expectation. Remember, you started this because it brought you joy. Try to hold on to that. Number two, set boundaries. When your hobby becomes a job, the lines between the work and personal life can blur very quickly. Make sure you set clear boundaries for when you're, air quotes, on the clock and when you're doing something just for the love of it. This also helps avoid burnout, and it keeps you connected to the passion that drove you to that hobby in the first place. Number three, embrace the process, not just the outcome. Sometimes in the rush to meet deadlines or please clients, we lose sight of what we love about the work itself. It's important to find moments where you can still enjoy the process rather than focusing purely on the final result. And number four, remember your why. This might be the most important one. When things start to feel like a grind, take a moment to remind yourself why you started it in the first place. What was it about this hobby that lit that spark for you? Sometimes reconnecting with your original why can bring you back to some of the joy that you may have lost along the way. At the end of the day, the key is balance. It's possible to make a living doing something you love, but you also have to guard the joy that comes from the hobby side of things itself. Whether it's finding time to do the activity purely for yourself or setting those boundaries to protect your mental space, it's all about keeping that passion alive while still meeting the demands of a professional life. If you're someone who's considering turning a hobby into a profession, I encourage you to go into it with your eyes wide open. It can be incredibly fulfilling, but it's also important to protect that passion. And if you're someone who's already made that leap and feeling the strain, give yourself permission to kind of step back, refocus, and recollect on things. Reconnect with why you fell in love with that hobby in the first place. So, what's your story? Have you ever turned a hobby into a job? How did it change how you felt about it? I'd love to hear what your experiences and thoughts are on this topic. Feel free to reach out and share your journey with me. Remember, life is all about finding balance between work, play, and everything in between. So go out there, do what you love, but never forget to hold on to the joy that made you love it in the first place. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope this episode has given you some insight and maybe even inspired you to think about your hobbies in a new light. I'll be back next time with more discussions to help you navigate life's twists and turns. Until then, take care of yourselves and remember to always keep a little bit of joy in everything you do. I'll catch you next time. Have a great day. Well, that's it for today's episode of Shelbrook Speaks Out. A big thanks to Intertwine for providing the music. Be sure to go over and check them out on Spotify. If you've enjoyed the show, head over to benshelbrook.com where you can grab some merch and find other ways to support the podcast. You can also show your support directly by clicking the support button on our website or through Buy Me a Coffee. Links to everything are in the episode description. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next time. This is Ben Shelbrook signing off. Have a great day.